didn't get the news till quite late last night.
Every day, it's like this. More calls about families needing help. And children growing up without the basics.
1 in every 2 or 3 houses we go in, there's at least one child without a bed.
They're not social workers. They're a charity trying to bridge the gaps.
We've had to get more staff because we've got more demand.
But they say the gaps keep getting bigger.
I mean, there's teenagers that are still wetting the bed because they've got lots of anxieties around the poverty that they're living in, which is making the situation worse because they've got no washing machines to wash these beds, so they're getting bullied at school because they smell. They're not sleeping, their education is being impacted, their mental health and well-being is being impacted. It's terrible, it really is. You wouldn't think that it happens, it's just such basic needs. A lot of people haven't got them.
But it is happening, and the staff who work at Alice, a charity based in Newcastle-under-Lyme, are seeing it all the time.
I mean, we've walked into a house a few weeks ago where there's a teenage boy sleeping on a pallet, a wooden pallet. There's no carpet on the floor, there's just a pallet on the floor with a blanket. There's no quilt or... that's a teenage boy.
It's mad, it's mad. The stuff we do is just sad and mental and needed, but we do what we do because we have to.
A report by some of the UK's biggest children's charities, and revealed exclusively on Channel 4 News tonight, shows the scale of cuts over the last decade. On average, a cut of almost 60% per child on early intervention services in the most deprived areas of England. In some places, there's been a decrease of at least 80%. Across all local authority areas in England, the amount spent on early preventative work fell from 3.6 billion to 1.8 billion. And all the time, demand rising, with the number of children in care up 21%.
We know that the government's facing a particularly difficult time given the spend we've had during the pandemic, but children and young people must be prioritised. If we are to achieve the government's aspirations around levelling up, there has to be investment in children and young people and services for them.
Stoke-on-Trent has made bigger cuts to early intervention children's services than almost anywhere else over the last decade. Now, with more than 1,000 children in care, and after the local Children's Services Department was deemed to be failing by Ofsted inspectors, the Conservative leader of the council told me it is clear they got their priorities wrong.
It's shameful. It's not a position that I'm proud of, and it's not one that I'm going to accept, hence overseeing investment into it that's seen, for example, us recruit approximately 80 social workers in the last year, because I'm determined that we are going to improve this situation. It's not a pleasant place where we are, and we work really hard to address and make a difference every day for children now in our city, and I don't ever want to lose focus of that.
Is the system broken?
I think it definitely needs a big review.
An independent review is underway. Its interim report last month said more money is needed by local councils, but it warned cash alone isn't the fix, describing the system as like a 30-year-old Jenga tower held together with sellotape.
It's really, really sad. It's heartbreaking. I mean, we cry a lot. Have we introduced you to the crying room? So we have actually got a crying room because a lot of us come back and we do cry. Because it shouldn't be happening in 2021. It really shouldn't.
Well, joining me now is the former Children's Commissioner for England, Anne Longfield, who's now Specialist Advisor to the Public Services Committee in the Lords and is looking at how reforming public services can address the growing problem of child vulnerability. Anne Longfield, did the scale of the funding cuts that we've set out in that piece, did that surprise you, or did you see it coming during your tenure?
Yeah, sadly, it didn't surprise me. The figures being going up and up in terms of reductions to early intervention. And what that means is that problems aren't helped when they develop. They're left to compound and develop into crisis. And then, of course, it's all a false economy when you look at it in cash terms, because the councils then have to pay much more to solve the crisis in the end. But I'm afraid around the country in disadvantaged communities, there are countless families living in poor accommodation, often many children to a bed, in conditions that most of us would think were long gone.
I mean, it
sadly,
sounds Dickensian, many children in a bed.
Yeah, I mean, I know, I think you're right. I think it's something that the majority of the population think is not something of this age. But I hear very, very regularly about families with 4 children sharing a bed, families who are moving between leaking accommodation, families who even live on a bus for the weekend because they don't have accommodation. And you don't have to look very far to find it. So as you've just heard there from the charities, and I'm very pleased they've put this forward, it's not difficult to see how corrosive this is for those individual families, for the communities, and indeed for wider society. It's not something that anyone should feel easy about. You
just said a family living on a bus for a weekend. Is that something that you came across when you were Children's Commissioner?
It was a family in South London. There's a particular issue in that area about families who have no recourse to public funds. Housing is particularly difficult and they weren't able to get temporary accommodation. And the school reported that the mother with 2 children walked in on a Monday morning, having spent the weekend riding around on a bus. I mean, for, most of the population, that would sound unreal and bizarre, but sadly that grinding reality is something that for some families is the reality of the day, and it's really difficult for them to get out of.
Did you take that case and other cases to successive ministers, and how did they respond?
Well, I didn't kind of hold back in putting many of these things forward. And certainly the Treasury is one of those departments that seems to find this very difficult to understand. They understand what it is to spend money, but they're not too sure about what the cost of saving it, what the savings are when you act early. And this is something that I really think needs to change. When we had interventions such as Sure Start, now some time ago, it was actually the Treasury who saw there was a problem and set one of their own officials on working out what to do about it. And it's this level of, I think now, responsiveness that we need to see. Levelling up is something which will never be possible unless these families can really get a foothold on being able to have a fair chance.